why are those residential real estate prices going up? And the same thing's happening in the United States. The answer is that there is an exodus, and I don't think that's too strong a word, out of the cities. People are put off by, I mean, cities have always been a trade-off. Cities are, okay, you have a lot of noise and some dirt and some hassles and maybe a slightly higher crime rate. But on the other hand, you have art and culture and museums and shows and restaurants and bars. And so you make the trade-off. You say, I'll accept these annoyances in exchange for all this, culture and buzz. And cities attract, the brightest people. So whether it's bankers or lawyers or doctors or artists, playwrights, actors, whatever, it's just there's a lot of buzz. That's why people go to cities. With these lockdowns, we've amplified all the negatives and taken away all the positives. We've shut the museums, the restaurants, the bars, the plays, the office buildings, things that attracted people. But meanwhile, again, probably not as bad in Australia as it is here, but crime is on the rise. Murder rate in New York has doubled. Suicide rates across the country have tripled. And that's New York. The suicide rate's national. There are all these dysfunctions, and a lot of them, and of course, when you have highly concentrated populations, which you do in cities, a lot of that's worse. So what people are doing, I say people, it's the people who can afford it. They're getting out of the cities and they're going to nearby suburbs or even further out, what we call exurbs, which are, the next ring beyond the suburbs. And so there is that demand for housing. I'd be willing to bet money that the place you're describing is a pretty attractive neighborhood. So they're booming, and the same thing's true in the United States. But what's the other side of that? We're depopulating our cities. Cities are the greatest wealth generating phenomena in the history of civilization. I mean, that's what civilization means. It means cities. And so if we're depopulating and draining our wealth creating engine, what does that do to the economy long run? So as an individual choice, it makes sense and I understand it. But the macro effect is we're depopulating these wealth generating places. I mean, just take any downtown area. It could be Melbourne or Adelaide or Sydney or New York for that matter. If there's an attractive downtown office building, let's say you're a large company, insurance company, whatever, and you used to have 10 floors as your corporate headquarters. Well, now everyone's been working from home for almost a year. That's nothing that anyone would have recommended, a year ago. But we were forced to do it, and guess what? It works. Employers and employees are finding that, hey, it works. You can communicate and get stuff done, and maybe there's some attractions to it. So this work from home thing is here to stay. What companies will do, they'll say, well, instead of 10 floors, I only need 2 floors, and I'll have attractive offices, but you'll reserve them. You'll call up and say, hey, I need an office 2 days next week to meet some clients. Done. They'll build locker rooms. They won't be like high school locker rooms. They'll be very attractive. You'll keep your laptop and your sweater and your scarf or whatever in your locker. You'll show up, take your stuff out of your locker. Some receptionist will tell you which office is yours for those 2 days. Set yourself up, meet your clients, go home and work from home. What does that mean? If you cut commercial real estate capacity or utilization by 80%, we'll start with the cleaning crew and the reception, but what about the food trucks, the restaurants, the shopping, the public transportation, drinks after work, on and on and on, all the things that are ancillary to that downtown office location. You cut that by 50 to 80%. What is that doing to your economy? So these are examples. By the way, this will take a year to play out. This is not an overnight thing. So the tenants are not paying rent. If they are, they've called up and negotiated a 50% increase. I have some involvement in commercial real estate, and I see this in real time. So rents are down by perhaps half or all the way to zero if they're not paying. And everyone says, well, landlords are rich. No, they're not. The landlords take the rents, but they have mortgages. So if the tenants aren't paying the landlords can't pay the mortgagee, and that falls on the banks, right? Except the banks are clever. They've securitized it and sold it probably to you and me, right? We have our 401ks like a superannuation fund, but you look in the fund and do you have some, commercial real estate REIT or something that Morgan Stanley sold you? Well, maybe you do. And what's inside? No one knows, but take a look. But that ripple effect I just described can take a year to play out. So we haven't seen the end of this. So the bottom line on all this is that interest rates are going up in anticipation of inflation based on handouts. The reality is the handouts are not being spent, they're being saved, which does nothing for inflation. And it's also not sustainable, which is what are you going to do? Hand out a $2 trillion deficit spending package every 6 months? Because that's kind of what we've been doing since last summer. And they keep saying, well, this is the last one. It'll be sustainable. It's not sustainable. It's a handout and people need the money. But if they put it in the bank, which they're doing, this is a classic liquidity trap. So what's going to happen? Yeah. But meanwhile, the interest rates are going up, perhaps for the wrong reason, but they're going up. That's going to slow the economy further. We're already seeing mortgage applications dry up. We're seeing the housing bubble, not bubble, but pretty steep increase in residential housing starting to level up. So by, hard to say, but I would say by March or April, this whole thing is going to go in reverse. Everything we just talked about is going to go in reverse. The economy is not going to have the traction. Unemployment is going to remain high. Velocity is going to continue to drop. There's not going to be any inflation. Those interest rates are a headwind. They're going to drop, and the price of gold is going to shoot up. So my advice to potential gold investors is it's on sale. Go get some right now. It's always better to buy low and sell high. And but I would expect the price to be much higher by mid-year.
I know that you've said this before, or I'm pretty sure you've said this before, that to stimulate an economy, you need to reduce interest rates by somewhere around 3-4% to have an effect. When interest rates are currently at zero, how can you do that? Where do you go from zero?
Well, a couple of things. The short answer is you can't. You in theory, you can go to negative rates, but negative rates don't work. We have experience from the ECB, Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, elsewhere, that negative rates don't work. They're negative rates, but they don't. It's not more of the same. Cutting rates from 3% to zero has a beneficial effect, but cutting them from 0 to -1, now you're through the looking glass. You don't get any more pop. You don't get any more bang for the buck. And there are reasons for that, which are as a central bank, what signal are you sending? Well, see, the idea of negative rates is you're going to spend the money, because if I'm going to take it away, you put money in the bank, even at zero, you put money in the bank, you go away for a year, come back, the same amount of money should be there. That's the zero interest rate. But a negative interest rate, -1%, you put $100,000 in the bank, you go away for a year, you come back, you only have $99,000. Because I took $1,000, that's 1% negative interest. So the idea is, if I'm going to take your money, you're going to spend it fast because you don't want me to take your money. And that's going to have the stimulative effect that we talked about. That's not actually what happens. What happens, two things. Number one, people have lifetime goals. Their retirement, their healthcare, their parents' healthcare, their children's education, buying a house. There's some large lifetime goal you have, and that's why you save money in the first place. If I'm taking your money away, you're going to save more, not less. You still want to achieve that goal. I've made it more difficult, but you're actually going to save more. They want you to spend it, but now you're saving more. And the second thing is, what signal is a central bank sending when they have negative interest rates? They're saying that they're worried about deflation, not inflation, but deflation. Yeah. So if they're telling me, if central bank is telling me that deflation is a problem, I'm going to wait. Why should I buy anything right now? Wait till the price drops. And by the way, a negative interest rate, -1%, my example, is a nominal phenomena. But in real terms, if you have deflation, my money is worth more. So even though my dollar amount may be less, my purchasing power went up because prices went down. And so that's why negative interest rates don't work, because A, you're sending a deflation signal, so people defer spending, and B, they have lifetime goals, so they actually save more. So negative rates don't work. So you're right, you're stuck at zero, there you are. Pardon me, you can do QE, you can do quantitative easing. And usually what happens is they hand the ball over, I don't know if it's a rugby match or whatever, but they hand the ball from monetary policy, which is now impotent, to fiscal policy, which is deficit spending. But there you have other kinds of headwinds having to do with very high debt levels. More to the point, in terms of what a central bank can actually do, they can't stimulate. They can print money, and governments can spend money and incur deficit spending. But again, none of it does any good if people don't actually spend it, and that's a psychological phenomenon. And the Fed or the Reserve Bank of Australia or any central bank can print money, no doubt about it, but they can't change people's psychology. We had an external shock, an exogenous shock in the form of the pandemic that caused people to stop spending, save more, or they were unemployed. Or if you're the unemployed individual, you're not taking your friends out for dinner these days. You're putting money in the bank, and even if you still have your job, you're going to save money because you're worried you might be next. You might be the next one to get laid off, or your company might shut down next week or next month. And so you're going to save more. It's what economists call precautionary savings, or, in plain English, saving for a rainy day. And that's what's going on. It's going on all over the world. So it's one way to pay. People say America has never defaulted on its debt. Well, first of all, that's not true. It's not a true statement. But the easiest, quietest, stealthiest way to default is inflation. It's like, hey, here's your $1 billion back. Good luck buying a loaf of bread because I destroyed the value of the dollar. And so now 3%, we'll do it in, do the math, we'll do that in about 22 years. At 10%, you cut the value of the dollar in half in 7 years. By the way, that is what happened between 1977 and 1981. In that 5-year period, the dollar lost over 50% of its purchasing power.
According to Jim Ricards, hyperinflation is coming to America, and the raising of interest rates won't be able to help fight inflation. In fact, it will make inflation even worse. Inflation will impact stock market as Jim Ricards think it will brings the economy into recession, and unemployment will go up to 4 or maybe even 5%. But all Jerome Powell can say is, too bad, that's painful and we have to get there, but we're gonna pay higher prices if we don't. And then there's the myth of 2% inflation. The Federal Reserve have something called inflation targeting, where if they fail to have at least 2% inflation per year, then it means the economy is going into deflation, or to put it simply, the economy is slowing down and therefore unemployment is going to go up and the economy will go into recession. In order to prevent that from happening, the Federal Reserve have to target the inflation to at least 2% per year in order to bring price stability to the market and to keep the economic wheel running smooth. At least that's the theory, but to Jim Ricards it doesn't make any sense. The Fed have raised interest rates way too high, but the inflation is not going down yet. In fact, inflation goes way up even higher than before. People said between 1913 and 2023, the dollar has lost 95% of its value, but we don't need to wait for another 110 years. Jim Ricards explains that in the 1980s, the dollar loses half of its value in just 5 years. Will it do that again? Will the economy goes into recession? Let's find out.
A lot of people like to bang the table and say, since the creation of the Fed in 1913, the dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power. Well, that's a true statement, but you don't need 110 years. We lost 50% in 5 years between 1977 and 1982. So inflation is insidious. It is a tax. It is a form of theft. But like the kid with the mother's wallet, if you keep the theft in small little bites, but do it long enough, you can get the whole thing and no one will notice. So they say we want 2% because we want to be able to cut if we have to. But the real reason is we want to basically erode the value of the debt and erode the purchasing power of the dollar in ways that you don't notice. And they can be very patient. That's how they do it. But to your point, Addison, well, hasn't the Fed been raising interest rates? Yes, but real rates are still negative. So if inflation's 9 and the Fed's at 2, the real rate is -7. That's a really, really low interest rate. And if you say, okay, inflation's come down to 6 and the Fed's up to 4, about 4.5 right now. So the real rate is now -1.5 in my example. Well, that's a lot less than 7. But still a negative real rate. We are not in the world of positive real rates. So then the question is, okay, how is the Fed doing at getting inflation to the target, the 2% we talked about, and we explained why that's their number. And this says a lot about what's going on in the stock market right now, because you go all the way back to August 26, 2022. That was Jay Powell's Jackson Hole speech. And he said, inflation's, he didn't use the word out of control, but he said inflation's way too high. We're going to bring it down to our 2% target. We know unemployment's going to go up. We know he will probably have recession. He did not use the R word. He didn't say recession, but he said, growth will suffer, unemployment will go up. That's just a fancy way of saying there's going to be a recession. And we're not going to stop until we get there. And so, in other words, too bad. Unemployment's going to go up to some number. I don't know what, 4 or 5%, which is pretty high. It's right now it's 3.4, I believe, the lowest since 1969. So unemployment's going to go up. The economy's going to go into recession, but too bad. That's the price we all have to pay to get inflation down under control on the way to 2%. In other words, in the way Jay Powell rationalizes this, he said, yeah, that's painful, and we're going to pay a high price to get there, but we're going to pay a higher price if we don't. If we don't get to 2%, and we let this thing spiral out of control and or even stay at 4 or 5% for a prolonged period of time, that the economic damage from that in terms of lost investment, misallocation of capital, basically people losing money on their investments, is going to be much higher than maybe a short recession.
Here's the interesting part. Jerome Powell scares the market with 6 speeches. He said the same thing again and again. We need to get to 2% inflation, which means raising the interest rates even more, and therefore we're going to have a recession and unemployment is going to go up. With the Fed being hawkish, the market should go down. Instead, the market got rallied because they believe inflation is going to go down soon. Jim Ricards thinks the Fed is already reached at something called the terminal rate, a rate which inflation will go down on its own, so the Fed won't need to raise the interest rates any further. But the Fed keeps raising it and making the economy crash even further. So how is it going to end? When will the Fed needs to stop raising interest rates? Let's listen to what Jim Ricards have to say.
So he said that the market didn't believe him. The market rallied, went down a little bit right around that time, but then the market rallied in October. And he comes out at the end of September, gives another speech at an FOMC meeting, comes out November 2nd, gives another speech, comes out November 30th, gives a speech at the Brookings Institution, and then comes out in mid-December with another speech, and then again a couple of weeks ago on February 1st. So it's like 6 speeches in about 5 months. And he said the same thing every time. He said, we're getting to 2%. Believe me when I said we're going to have a recession. Unemployment's going to go up. Too bad. We have a lot of work to do. We're not done. The market has flipped on and off. Half the time the market doesn't believe me. Go, yeah, you say that. But in fact, inflation is coming down faster than you thought. You're probably, I should introduce a concept. I guess a lot of people have heard of it, but there's this new concept called the terminal rate. The Fed's trying to get to the terminal rate. And so what's the terminal rate? Well, no one actually knows what the number is. I don't know, but neither does Jay Powell. But it's a theory. And the theory is, okay, the terminal rate is a rate set by the Fed that's high enough to bring inflation down without further rate hikes. We get to a level, and that level is high enough that inflation will come down on its own just by waiting without raising the rate again. And the conundrum, I hate to use that word, but it is a conundrum. The conundrum the Fed faces right now is they have been raising rates and inflation has been coming down. Those two things are true. But is inflation coming down because they're raising rates, in which case maybe you want to keep raising them, or are you already at the terminal rate? It's coming down on its own, and now the danger is you're going to go too far. And that's the debate with Wall Street. And so Wall Street is sort of leaning to the view, now you're probably already at the terminal rate. Inflation's coming down. You need to back off. You need to stop and probably pivot. This was the famous word for the last 6 months. The pivot means you're actually going to have to cut rates because you have gone too far and you're going to cause a pretty bad recession. And so the expectation as recently as December was that the Fed would pivot around March or April. They would raise in February, maybe March. But pretty quickly after that, they would cut rates. And if the Fed's cutting rates, buy stocks. It's typical Wall Street analysis. It always ends with buy stocks, particularly tech stocks.
So, with the current high interest rates environment and reckless government spending, what should we do to protect our money from inflation? Should we buy stocks? And what stocks should we buy? The Fed said it will raise the interest rates even further, but the market thinks the opposite will happen. So who's right and wrong here? Let's hear what Jim Ricards think. Spoiler alert. This is not investment advice.
But the Fed has been saying the opposite. So there's been this battle where Powell goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 speeches, says the same thing. We're not stopping. And Wall Street says, oh, yes, you are. So buy stocks. Well, who's right? Well, there's an old saying on Wall Street, don't fight the Fed. I don't think of it as who's right or wrong. You could have an opinion. The way I think of it is I just want to know what you're going to do. Because if I know what you're going to do, then you can trade accordingly. You can plan for that and you can prepare for it. And what they're going to do is they're going to keep raising rates. Even if they're at the terminal rate already, I think they might be. Even if they are, they don't think so. Their opinion counts for a lot more than mine. and they're going to keep going. But by the time inflation comes down enough to say, yeah, okay, we're at the terminal rate, nice job, it'll be too late. They will have gone too far because the Fed's always the last to know. We're seeing something globally we've never seen before. And it is the best single indicator of a recession. The last time we saw anything like this was in 2007, just ahead of the 2008 financial catastrophe. So the stock market's saying it's all good, Goldilocks, soft landing, Fed's going to get the memo, they're going to cut rates, the pivot, and buy stocks. The bond market is saying, no, this is bad, and it's going to get worse, and it's actually too late for the Fed to do anything about it. But what happens is, as you get closer to the actual thing you're worried about, the inversion gets nearer and nearer. Now it is literally a month away or less.
The economy is in a huge mess. Jim Ricards said that this is the best single indicator of a recession. An inverse yield curve is when a yield on a 30-year bond is lower than a 10-year bond. Simply put, you get more money by saving it in less time. Normally, you should get more money when you save it for longer because the risk is bigger. You have to wait for more time in order to get your money back. But instead, investors prefer the shorter bond because they're afraid that the economy might be in a recession, meaning that the economy is slowing down. Jim Ricards said that there are at least three markets: the stock market, the bond market, and the real market. If the economy is in a recession, stocks and bond markets usually know it later, but the real market knows it first. When the sales go down, they have to cut costs. And eventually, they have to fire their employees. Entrepreneurs and small businesses know it best when it comes to the state of the economy because I believe that Jerome Powell never bought groceries by himself. So, how could interest rates go up if we're in a recession? The fact is that the interest rate is a lagging indicator. Let Jim Ricards explain it to you.
Interest rates are a lagging indicator. Everyone's like, well, how could interest rates going up if we're in a recession? The answer is, as you get closer to recession, who figures it out first? Well, the Fed figures it out last. They're usually the last to know. Wall Street is second last to know. The people who figure it out first are actual business people, entrepreneurs, restaurant owners, dry cleaners, taxi drivers, or even medium-sized businesses. They see it. A lot of business people are living in the real world in real time. They know what's happening now, and the stock market tends to figure it out later. But as far as banking and credit is concerned, what happens is if you're a business person and you see business heading down, fewer customers, whatever, you go out and borrow all you can. You're like, hey, there's a really bad recession coming. If I got lines of credit, I'm going to use them up now. I don't want my bank changing the terms. I don't want material adverse adverse change clauses kicking in. Instead, I'm going to borrow everything I can. And that creates a demand for funds and interest rates go up. And then the recession hits and the bankers go, what's going on? Credit losses start going up. And then they just turn off the spigots and they raise standards. They stop doing loans. And then interest rates will start to come down. But interest rates peak after the recession has already begun. So stock market's telling us Goldilocks, bond market's telling us, here comes, Hurricane Mitch or whatever. And then there's what I call the reality. What I see is a kind of a hybrid. The Fed's doing what they're doing, right or wrong. Okay, they're doing what they're doing. The market has their own interpretation. I agree with the market, certainly the bond market, that the Fed has probably over-tightened. They're going to keep going for the reasons I explained. That means they're going to make it worse. They're going to make the recession even worse. And we've seen this movie before. This is exactly what happened in 2018. I mean, I don't know. Attention spans seem to be short these days, but it wasn't that long ago. Go back and look at a chart, any stock index chart from October 1st, 2018 to December 24th, 2018. The stock market dropped 20%. I mean, it's like 19.9 or something on the Dow, so maybe not technically a bear market, but yeah, what's the difference? It dropped 20%. Culminating in the Christmas Eve massacre, December 24th, 2018, when it dropped, I think NASDAQ dropped like 3% in one day. Now, here's the point. The Fed was tightening into that collapse. The Fed tightened on December 16th, 2018, only like 8 days before the Christmas Eve massacre. And after most of the 20% collapse had already happened, they tightened one last time. So what it shows you is that when the Fed's on a mission, they actually don't care about the stock market, this whole, Bernanke put and Greenspan put and all that. That's not how it works. They don't care that much about the stock market level. Here's what they do care about. They care about disorderly markets, and that's the key word. It's not if stocks are going down, but it's kind of a little 0.5% a day, 1% a day, trending down, lower highs, lower lows, trending down. The Fed doesn't care about that. They're not going to bail out the stock market. They do care if it's disorderly. When was it disorderly? Well, March 2020, at the worst part of the pandemic, it dropped like 30% in like 2 or 3 weeks. The fall of 2008, I mean, it was like somebody opened a trap door. The Fed does care about that because that kind of disorderly behavior can feed on itself and end up in a 1929 type scenario. So the Fed will get the memo, as I put it, stop raising rates and begin cuts when the markets are disorderly, but not just because they're going down.
Jim Ricards said that the Federal Reserve will only care enough if it's a disorderly collapse, meaning if the markets, either stocks or bonds, are going down like 30% in just 2 weeks. If it's just a little plunge in a day like a 5% drop in Amazon stocks, then the Fed won't care about it. But what the Fed and everybody is missing is the state of the economy itself. The unemployment rate is at its worst now, and massive layoffs in the tech industry are in the news everywhere. Because of what, you might ask? Yes, you are correct, it's because of the high interest rates. The companies need to pay more for the interest on their debt, so they have to reduce their headcount. At the same time, their revenue decreased because consumers unsubscribed from their services because of the rising prices everywhere, whether it's groceries, gas, or even food. So yeah, everything will go south, I guess.
Now, here's what the Fed is missing, or maybe everybody's missing. When you hear these layoff announcements, people are like, well, if they're laying off, why isn't the unemployment rate going up? Unemployment lags the business cycle. Unemployment is a lagging indicator. When you're an employer, entrepreneur, and you're in any kind of distress, not as many customers walking in the door, you'll do everything you can to avoid laying people off. You'll, be late on the rent. You'll turn down the lights. Find a cheaper laundry, whatever it takes. And then by the time you get around to firing people, you run out of options. Like, I've done everything I can. Now my business is in jeopardy. I have to fire some people. So that, and then combine that with what I just said about severance and, rolling terminations, et cetera. It's a lagging indicator. We know enough right now to know that number's going up this spring. But that's not inconsistent with the fact that we're already in a recession. It's exactly what you would expect, that unemployment's a lagging indicator. Now, having said that, what else is the Fed missing? Well, wages are up 5% on an annualized basis, 5.2% on an annualized basis. I'm like, yeah, and inflation's 7% or 6%. So your real wage just went down 1 or 2 points. Because when the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports those wage numbers, those are nominal numbers. I'm not saying they're fake. But you have to know that they're nominal, and you have to subtract inflation to find out what's happening to real wages. And the answer is real wages have been going down for a couple of years because they runs around 5% annualized, give or take. Sounds like a 5% raise. What do you want? Well, yeah, but with 8-9% inflation, or even 6% inflation, your real wage is going down. So that's not a robust number at all. The Fed, by the way, the Fed wants to make it worse. The Fed agrees that those wage gains are too high. But my point is, in real terms, they're actually going down, but the Fed wants them to go down more. That would be one way to put it. If you get inflation down and wages are constant, then the real wage goes up relative to where it was before. But if you're unemployed, you have no wage. So that's another issue. Now, what the Fed is missing, and it's a long list, but there's something called the labor force participation rate. Now, the labor force participation rate, you just take the number of people working divided by the total working age population. It's all you do. It's not sophisticated. And that number today is around 61%, 61.2, give or take, percent. But as recently as 2000, that number was over 70%. And has come down ever since, and it dropped like a stone during 2020, during the pandemic lockdown. Came back a little bit, but not much. The reason it got, first of all, it's never 100%. It shouldn't be. There are legitimate reasons to be working age population not working. You're a homemaker. You're a student. There's a bunch of perfectly good reasons. So it's never 100%, not even close. But 70 is pretty high and 60 is pretty low. And the trend has been down. So that leaves, relative to kind of a normalized number, that leaves about 8 to 10 million people between the ages of 25 and 54 who are not in the workforce. There's a big untapped labor pool. But if you took that group and threw it into the unemployment numbers, the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates it, unemployment would be about 9%. And that's a depression level of unemployment.
Modern monetary theory, MMT, first of all, it's well over 100 years old, maybe 140 years old.
Okay.
So there's nothing particularly modern about it. It goes by another name, chartalism, but it's the same thing. Money is what the state says it is. If the state says it's money, it's money. I think, okay, interesting. How do you actually enforce that? How do you back that up? And the way you back it up is taxation. So if we all make money, gains, payments, income, whatever, and the state says you got to pay tax on it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we will only accept our definition of money in the form of taxes. So if you don't go along with our definition of money, you can't pay your taxes. And if you can't pay your taxes, you end up in jail. But the idea is that money is what the state says it is, because the state says that's the only thing we take in the form of taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, we'll put you in jail. Now, and that's where chartalism comes from, because the King's Charter or the Queen's Charter or whatever. So if that's your starting place, then there's no comparison between a national budget and an individual budget. If you and I don't pay our bills, someone's going to repossess the car or take the keys to the house or whatever. So we got to balance our budgets over some time frame. But if the government doesn't pay its bills, so what? Just print some more money, and or raise money in the form of bonds. And then you say, well, what if they don't want to buy the bonds? If the market doesn't want to buy the bonds and the interest rates are up? Well, that's what central banks are for. The central bank will buy the bonds, keep the rates low. Oh, yeah, but who's going to pay the central bank? Well, we'll just issue more. Now, I realize some of this sounds laughable, but I'm telling you verbatim, this is what modern monetary theory is. So there's no limit on how much you can spend, no limit on the size of your deficit. Danielle referred to the debt to GDP ratio. I agree, that's a very important economic indicator, but the modern monetary theorists will say, no, it's not. Who cares? U.S. debt to GDP ratio is about 130%, but it's growing quickly. And if you look at global statistics and say, well, who's at that lunch table? Like, who else is around 130%? The answer is Lebanon, Greece, Italy. These are your classmates. But then everyone points to Japan, where the ratio in Japan is about 280%. They say, see, Japan, you go to the Ginza, the lights are still on. Yeah. So we could go to 280% or whatever, no problem. I think Japan's a special case for a number of reasons, and I wouldn't want to be Japan. They're in a curious position where the population is declining. So their per capita numbers are actually better than their gross numbers. And Saki Kibara-san, famous Mr. Yen in the 1980s, he explained this to me personally. I had lunch with him in Korea. And of course he's right mathematically. I said, but the reductio ad absurdum is Japan ends up with one person who owns the whole country, and she's very rich. But that's kind of how the Japanese are thinking about it. So I don't know if we want to go there. But just to take it a step further, and a lot of this comes from Stephanie Kelton, and I met Stephanie, very nice person, but she's this way off on off the reservation, so to speak, in terms of these theories. But she's done a good job of articulating them. So, for example, she says, and this is from her book, so this is not I'm not imposing this on her. She says that the government bond market is a favor to investors. We're doing you a favor by giving you something you can invest in. We don't actually need a government bond market because we could just give the Fed wire instructions to Lockheed. And if we want to buy a new, fighter aircraft or Raytheon or whoever is providing services to the government or the Social Security Administration for that matter, the Fed could just wire the money directly to these government vendors. Who needs a bond market? It's kind of an inefficient pain in the neck. But we do it anyway because you guys need a place to park your money. I mean, this is what they say. Wow. But just to kind of step back a little bit, big picture, what they're doing, and this can be done in practice. See, the problem with refuting modern monetary theory is you get very far down the road saying, yeah, that's actually true, that's actually true, that's actually true. At the end, it all falls down. But they go very far down a path because the truth is you could give the Fed wire instructions and they could send money to Lockheed. You could issue twice as much debt. I mean, there's a debt ceiling, but Congress routinely raises it. But what she's done and what the other theorists have done, they've taken the Treasury, which is a cabinet level executive branch office, and the Fed, which is, an independent, privately owned, okay, the president picks the governors, but, technically privately owned, independent agency, and she's merged them. She's merged the balance sheet of the Treasury and the Fed, said whatever the Treasury wants to spend, the Fed is there to finance it. The Fed can buy the bonds, and we can skip the bonds completely and just give the Fed wire instructions and send the money out. Now, this is what they say. This is not me. So, and then you say, well, okay, I don't see what's wrong with that. I mean, it sounds, legally, I'm a lawyer also, this is all true. It can be done in practice. I guess that's my point, regardless of the legalities. So, where does it all fall down? A couple things. Number one, the theorists completely ignore the role of commercial banks. They're so focused on the Fed and the Treasury. Real money, the money that counts, is created by commercial banks, not by the Fed. Pardon me. The Fed, when they create base money, that's available to banks as reserves, but there's no shortage of reserves right now. They're paying interest on excess reserves.
Right.
Most of the Fed's balance sheet is not cash, it's excess reserves. So there's no constraint on banks' ability to lend or borrowers' ability to borrow money and spend. That can be constrained by reserves in theory, but it's not, because they have trillions in excess reserves.
Okay.
So that's not even an issue. But but the money's created at the banks. If people don't want to borrow and banks don't want to lend, then the M2 and M1 and M2 don't expand. And then velocity, which is the turnover of money, is collapsing. It's up a little bit recently, but that's after a Red Bull cliff dive in 2020. And that's, I always say, if you have $24 trillion, and times zero is zero.
Right.
Meaning if that's your money supply and your velocity is zero, you don't have an economy. So velocity is psychological. The Fed can't control it. There are all kinds of behavioral aspects. The real money that kind of creates economic activity doesn't come from the Fed. It comes from the commercial banks. They ignore the commercial banks, and then on top of everything else, they ignore foreign exchange channels. You can destroy the dollar. Like, everything inside the United States can kind of look okay. But if the dollar is like, it's worth, €5 or sorry, $5 to the euro, so, it's worth 20% of what it is now. Every other currency strengthens against the dollar, or gold goes to $4,000 an ounce almost overnight. What you've done, you've devalued the dollar 80, 90%, which is what we did in the 70s. Measured in gold, you go from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. That's a 90% devaluation of the dollar, measured in gold. And we actually had a 50% devaluation of the dollar between 77 and 81, measured by CPI. So this has happened before, not that long ago. So they're on a path to destroy the dollar. They're on a path to destroy the international monetary system. Here we are in Bretton Woods, where it all began. But governments may be back here trying to fix things sooner than later. So now, I doubt there are 5 members of Congress who could give you a tenth of what I just said about modern monetary theory. Right. But they're doing it. Whether they know it or not, whether they understand it, can define it or not, it doesn't matter. They're doing it. These multi-trillion-dollar, year-after-year deficits, debt to GDP going past 130%, unlimited bond issuance, monetization by the Fed or the commercial banks, they're playing it out. So this will end in something a lot worse than a recession. The U.S. is heading into a recession, and we may be in a recession. Everyone's like, wait a second. Yesterday, GDP was up 5%, and it was. That was the number for it was the first government estimate for the third quarter of 2023. It was up 5%, but it was very heavy on consumption and very heavy on inventory. When wholesalers and distributors build up inventory, that counts as GDP. Well, it's fine to build up inventory if people are buying the stuff, but if they don't buy the stuff and you're up to the rafters in inventory, you got to start writing it down. This is where you see, you go to the Gap and you get like 10 shirts and 5 pairs of jeans for $30. I mean, the inventory situation comes down to the consumer. Are people buying stuff? It looks like the consumer hit the brakes in August. Now, the second quarter is July, August, September. Sometime around mid to late August, after 2 pretty strong months, and they were strong, the consumers just hit the brakes. Now, they've done enough to make the third quarter strong, but going into the fourth quarter, they may just, not show up for the game. A couple of reasons for that. Number one is, during the pandemic, you go back to 2020, 2021, what was going on? Well, starting with Trump in, I think, June 2020, he gave everybody a $1,400 check. If you got a heartbeat, you got a check. And then Trump did it again in December
2020, sorry, just before he left office, it was another $600 check. Biden comes in and says, well, I can top that. And Biden does in February 2021, right after he was sworn in. Here comes another $1,600 check. And then when people got those checks, they saved a lot of it. So what happened in 2023? People drew down their savings. The savings rate got really low. Like they spent the savings they had. They didn't make new savings. And then they turned to the credit cards and ran up their credit card balances. Well, that feels good for a while. But then if you're paying the minimum and rolling over the balance and you're at your limit, your credit limit's used up, and the interest rates are 20%, some of them are 28%, you're going to double that balance in 3 years. So if you're like, I'll just pay the minimum this month and I'll figure it out, your balance is going up because the interest is compounding faster than you're paying it down at 25, 25%. So people are tapped out on their credit cards. They've used up their savings. They're getting into a deeper hole because the interest is compounding faster than they can pay off the credit cards. And they're just backing away. And it's showing up in things like gasoline consumption. It's way down. The demand for gasoline is what economists call inelastic, meaning you just have to buy it no matter what the price is. You got to take the kids to school or get to work or go shop, whatever it is. You're just going to buy the gasoline even if you don't like the price. By the way, lately prices have been coming down a little bit, which is another, that sounds good, but it's actually a bad sign because it's disinflationary, which kind of leans in the direction of a recession. But for gasoline consumption to drop, forgetting about the price, that means people are not driving. They're not going on vacation. They're not doing road trips. They're not driving any more than they have to. There are a lot of other signs. We don't have time to get into all the technicals with the negative swap spreads and inverted yield curves and all the rest. But it does look like the consumer slammed on the brakes around late August, early September. The fourth quarter could be a disaster. The stock market's starting to wake up to that fact. So I would say it's a pretty simple recommendation, Matt. Reduce your exposure to stocks overall. Increase your exposure to cash. It'll give you, you won't lose money on cash, assuming that inflation is not bad. And it'll give you a lot of optionality. You can go, if things get really, really, really bad, if you have cash, you can go shopping and find some bargains. But if you're in stocks and they go bad, you're just going to lose that money and never see it again. But if you do have stocks or some stocks, I would look at energy, defense, not for good reasons. There's enough wars going on, but defense will do well, and mining because gold and silver prices and strategic minerals will do well. So defense, mining, and energy are the sectors I'd be in. I'd lighten up on tech, get out of everything else, go to cash. Treasury notes look attractive here because interest rates are going to start to come down. I know they've been going up. I get it, but it looks like they peaked and have turned around. So Treasury notes, a good 2-year note, a 5-year note, will perform very well, and they're very safe, obviously. And just take it from there. But you've got to be tuned into the geopolitics to understand the stock market. You can treat them as separate subjects, but if the world's falling apart, so that's not good for stocks. Right. So when we say bond markets, Matt, we have to be careful which bond market. I'm talking about the U.S. Treasury bond market. The short-term treasuries, 4-month bills, 6-month bills, up to 1 year. The funny thing now is that the highest yields in the U.S. Treasury market are in like a 6-month bill. Like, wait a second, shouldn't I get more if I buy a 30-year bond, or shouldn't I get more if I buy a 10-year note? It's a longer maturity, more stuff can happen, inflation, bank freezes. All those things can happen. I want a higher interest rate for my longer term security. That's usually the way the yield curve looks. It's upward sloping. The longer the maturity, the higher the rate. That's not true today. The highest maturities are right around 6-month bills, 1-year bills, going out to 2-year notes. When you get to the 10-year note, you actually get a lower interest rate, lower what's called yield to maturity than you do on a 2-year note. The interesting thing about 2 years is you get a high rate, but it's less volatile than a 10-year note. It's more liquid. 10-year notes are pretty liquid, but 2-year notes are very liquid. So you can actually have the best of both worlds. You can have a shorter maturity, which means less risk in some ways, and a higher interest rate. So it's like I said, the best of both worlds. But the highest interest rate is actually from 6 months to 1 year. So those are very, very safe securities, and they're paying like 5.25%, not quite 5.5%, but well, between 5.25% and 5.5% for 6 month for a 6 month treasury bill. Why wouldn't you just buy one of those? I mean, it's more than what you get in the bank. Now, the answer is, well, yeah, Jim, that sounds good, but if interest rates go up even more, you're going to lose money on your capital. The value of the note or bond will go down if interest rates go up. That's bond math 101. Rates go up, prices go down. The opposite is true. Rates go down, prices go up. So you can make or lose money, but that inverse relationship kind of throws a lot of people, but that's just how it works. So yeah, buying a 2-year note that yields about 5.1%, very liquid, very safe, good return, more than your bank will pay you, more than most stocks will pay you. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, the answer is, if you think the 2-year note is going to go to 6%, you might not like it, because you're going to, if you hold it for 2 years, you'll get your money back. But if you want to sell in the meantime, you're going to have a capital loss on the note itself. So therefore, the next level of analysis is, well, what's going to happen to interest rates? Everybody wants to know that. In my view, they've peaked. They're going to come down. And if you like that action, you might prefer the 10-year note, because a longer maturity has a higher, not to get too technical, it's called DV01, dollar value 1 basis point. What it means is that, so interest rates come down a certain amount, 25 basis points, 50 basis points, or whatever. And I said bond prices go up, which they do, but how much do they go up? Well, the answer is, the longer the maturity, the more they go up. They're more volatile. And so the 2-year note's a really attractive piece of paper, very safe. You get your money back, liquid, you can get out of it, etc. The only reason not to buy would be if you thought rates are going to go up. I think they're coming down from here on out. But if you accept that view, then the 10-year note is going to have the biggest capital gains. Now, again, it's riskier. When I say risky, I'm talking about market risk. I'm not talking about credit risk. You are going to get your money back, but from a market risk point of view, if you had to sell it, a year from now or 6 months from now, for that matter, if rates go up, you're going to lose a little money on the value of the note itself. But if rates come down, not only do you get the 5% interest rate, which is sweet, but you're going to have a capital gain on the note, because that's what happens when rates come down. So the big question is, have rates peaked? And I would say they have. And I base that on what I said earlier about the economy. If we're going into a recession, we're going into a slowdown, we're looking at all kinds of geopolitical risk, stocks are coming down, then interest rates are going to come down too. The people ask me, are we going to have a recession? And my answer is, we might be in a recession right now and not even know it. We could be facing a global recession, including China, but just focusing on the U.S. Because that's the Fed's sort of territory. So Powell saying, the economy is great is nonsense. What he said, by the end of the year, we could be looking at 4.2% unemployment, 3.5 to 4% interest rates, and, kind of 2.7% inflation. You're like, wait a second, inflation is 8.6 today. How do you get to, 2.7, number one? And then what about rising unemployment and higher interest rates? How do you reconcile those things? He said all three of those things, but what state of the world could make those things come true? There's only one, which is a recession. A recession would do it. A recession will raise unemployment, higher interest rates will cause the recession, and the recession will cause inflation to go down. So in effect, Powell is saying we're going to have a recession. Inflation, prices go up, so we understand that, or maybe put differently, the value of your money goes down. You don't get as much for your money, same thing. But inflation, broadly speaking, has two causes. One is called, not to get too technical, but it's called cost push. This comes from the supply side. So there's a shortage of oil. And we've got a financial and economic war going on between Russia and the United States. The U.S. really started, but U.S., EU, Canada, Australia, Japan versus Russia. That's obviously disrupting supply chain, cutting down energy supply, causing the price of oil to go up, et cetera. So that's coming from the supply side. And you're exactly right. The Fed can't drill for oil. The Fed can't plant wheat. The Fed can't make semiconductors. So they can't do anything about this. And the supply chains are breaking down. They were breaking down before the war in Ukraine, but Ukraine has made it worse. The other source of inflation is called demand pull.
And this is when individuals, you, me, and all of our viewers, and everyday Canadians and Americans worry about inflation. We say, well, I'm just thinking about buying a refrigerator. Better buy it now before the price goes up, or the car, house, or whatever it might be. They're different, but they affect each other. When the cost push inflation from the supply side has enough effect, there's a tipping point or critical threshold in psychology. We say, maybe it is out of control. I better go buy some stuff. Then the velocity of money goes up, and then you get inflation. So the Fed can't do anything about cost push. They can't do anything about the price of oil, and you're right about that. But they're looking at the demand side, saying, hey, if this supply thing goes on long enough, eventually the psychology will change, and we'll get demand pull and behavioral, and that is really hard to change. So what they're trying to do, they know they can't change the supply side, but they're trying to squash the demand side before it gets out of control. Now, the question, of course, is can they do it? The answer is they can do it, but at what cost? So a general rule of thumb, this is really simple. You have to get, forget about nominal interest rates. Nominal interest rates are the rates you see on your screen, you hear about in the headlines and all that. Real interest rates are nominal interest rates minus inflation. Take the inflation out and see what's left. Well, right now, real interest rates are about 2%, actually 1.75% under the Fed's policy rate. Inflation's 8.6%. So, just round numbers, 1.5 minus 8.5, that makes the inflation rate -7. That's nowhere near. It's got to be +2. Real rates have to be +2 to squash inflation. Right now, they're -7. So that implies that the Fed has to raise interest rates to 10.5% to get to +2 real interest rates. That's never going to happen. They're never going to get there. They will destroy the economy long before they get there. So the Fed has no hope of squashing inflation from the demand side, as you described, by raising rates, unless inflation comes down for other reasons. So what they're going to do, they're going to keep raising rates, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, hope that inflation comes down from 8 to maybe 3, although I think that's a stretch. You could get into positive real rate territory, but they're really far away from it. So I think, by the way, I described what they're trying to do. I should make it clear they're going to fail. The only way inflation comes down, the way we're talking about, is if they trash the economy, a severe recession. If that happens, yeah, you say, well, do people still need to put gas in their cars? Well, you're right, but not if they're unemployed, because they're not going to work. There's a lot here that's just for show. It sounds good on TV, but there's a lot less here than meets the eye. But the point is, this is not over anytime soon. And even if it were, when you break supply chains, you can't just put them back together. It's like breaking a vase in 1,000 pieces, and you got to go buy a new vase. It's going to take years to undo this damage. So I spoke to the individual who was probably the single individual most responsible for building the modern supply chain. It was 30 years from 1989 to 2019. It was head of one of the largest companies in the world, and this is what they did, among other things. And he said, Jim, you have to understand, it took us 30 years to build it. It took us 3 years to blow it up. It's not going to come back in a year. This is going to take 5, 10, 15 years to build a new one. So it's what I call supply chain 2.0. Well, buying a refrigerator is a good idea. Buying a freezer might be a better idea. We're looking for food shortages by the fall. Now, when I say food shortages, in Africa and Middle East, this will mean mass starvation. You may see the greatest humanitarian crisis in history because they literally can't get the food. Everyone's like, well, gee, you can't get Ukrainian wheat. What's the big deal? Buy it from somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Canada and the United States grow an enormous amount of wheat, but we use most of it internally, and we feed, because it's not for humans, by the way. We feed our animals. This is how you feed cows, pigs. This is how you get beef and pork. This is an example of the supply chain, how it filters all the way through. So you would expect higher prices to persist. You would expect food shortages. Buying a freezer is not a bad idea. The future supply chain is going to be, it goes by different names. Janet Yellen calls it friendshoring. Macron calls it constellation. I call it a college of nations. But basically, we'll have supply chains and trade, but it'll be sort of members only. So US, Canada, Australia, Europe, others, Japan, will be invited to join, but not China. Russia is going to be in the waiting room for a while. We should be better allies with Russia, but the The Democrats in the United States have pretty much made that impossible, at least for the short run. And then there'll be other countries that are kind of neutral in that scheme, Brazil, India, and others. But the point is, you'll still have trade and you'll have supply chains, but it'll be kind of friendly countries, members only, and exclude China. So that decoupling is going to go ahead. The Chinese seem to be not only fine with it, but they're actually leading the way. Semiconductor manufacturing is moving back to the United States. The 20 billion of new semiconductor plants from Intel. And why is Taiwan Semiconductor spending over $5 billion to build new semiconductor fabrication plants in the United States? Well, obviously because they're worried about China. We're reshuffling the deck, but none of this stuff is easy. I mean, semiconductor plants take 5 years to build. A new refinery, forget it. That's like 7 to 10 years. We haven't had one in the United States since 1977. So it's going to take a while to do all this. Well, we can do it. So if I said we're definitely going to have inflation, you would know what to do. You'd buy gold, hard assets, land, silver, treasury notes, government bonds, etc. If I said we're definitely going to have deflation, you would also know what to do. You would reduce leverage. You would have more cash, and there are other assets you could go into. The problem is we could have both. There's no question we have inflation right now. It's front and center. But if the Fed squashes it and causes a recession or worse, you could flip to deflation very quickly. So this is going to sound like an obvious statement. What you want is diversification. Sounds obvious, but most people don't know what diversification is. I see people, I've got 50 stocks in 10 different sectors. I'm highly diversified. I'm like, no, you're not. You have one asset class called stocks. Real diversification, have a slice of stocks, gold, real estate, cash. Agriculture is a good investment. Energy, forget the Green New Scam. That's a joke. Oil and natural gas are going to be around for a long time.
The debt's not going up at 2% or 3%. The debt's going up 8, 9, 10% or more. The U.S. had a $1 trillion baseline budget deficit, $1 trillion per year deficit for fiscal 2020 pre-pandemic. The Congress threw $3 trillion of emergency aid on top of that. And I'm not even criticizing all those programs. I mean, the payroll protection plan loans, the extended unemployment benefits, the increased unemployment benefits. Imagine where we'd be if we hadn't done that. But that aside, debt is debt. They piled $3 trillion on top. Now, this is going to take the U.S. debt to GDP ratio up to 135%. It was 106% when Donald Trump was sworn in. It's close to 130% today. Because remember, you got two things going on. It's a debt to GDP. So debt's your numerator and GDP is your denominator, right? Well, what happened? Well, the denominator shrank. This got smaller and this got bigger. So what happens to the ratio? It blows up. So now it's 135%. If you get the laws of economics right, which is not easy because most economists don't, but if you get them right, it's really a reflection of human nature. I mean, what is an economy other than all the people in the economy starting businesses, buying, selling, traveling, providing goods and services, et cetera. So human nature doesn't change, or at least it hasn't changed much in the last 100,000 years. So the fundamental laws of economics don't change either, but circumstances change, facts change, and that's important. Now, to answer your question, Kerry, you're right. There is a school of thought, a growing one, an influential one, that the debt doesn't matter. It's like, well, wait a second. So what? So the debt to GDP ratio went to 135%, which it did. Who cares? Well, what's wrong with it? 180%. We got issues. We got problems. Print up the money and monetize the debt and spend it and keep going. What is the problem? This comes under the banner of something called modern monetary theory, MMT. It's flawed. It's wrong, but it's got its followers, and those followers are now in the White House because one of the things Joe Biden had to do to get elected was to make peace with the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. They take the view that if the Treasury didn't spend the money, how would anybody make any money? That's ridiculous, but that's what they say. They say, hey, when the Treasury spends money, what do? Well, they build aircraft. They have benefit programs. They have government contracts. They do whatever they do. But when the Treasury gives you the money, you take the money and you spend it on somebody else, goods and services, go out to dinner, have subcontractors, whatever it might be. That's the real source of money. They also take the Treasury and the Fed and they merge them. Now, that's not legally the case. The Treasury and the Fed are separate institutions. The Treasury is just part of the executive branch, and the Fed is an independent agency. And the Federal Reserve banks are actually privately owned. That a lot of people know. Some people know that, some people don't. But the Federal Reserve banks are privately owned by banks in the districts, so Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera. So they're completely separate. But the theorists ignore that and say no. The Treasury needs to spend money because that's how the economy grows, and the Fed can monetize the debt. So you spend the money you don't have, you borrow to cover it, you issue bonds to cover the borrowing, and if the market wants to buy the bonds, fine. But if not, the Fed can buy them and put them away on the balance sheet, wait 30 years and collect the money. What's the problem? Who cares about the debt to GDP ratio? It's kind of a statistical abstract, but why should that stand in the way of using money to solve our problems, which are free healthcare, free childcare, free tuition, forgiveness of student loans? That's a 1.6 trillion dollar ticket, by the way. And look, everyday readers and investors, there's no reason they should know all this stuff. This is total inside baseball. You have to be a geek like me to kind of keep up with it, but it's all coming. But what that means is we're going to test the Rogoff-Reinhardt thesis. Now, let me just take a minute to explain that. Up to a certain debt to GDP ratio, there is a Keynesian multiplier greater than 1. So the classic example is the UK was in a depression before the rest of the world. They have been hit pretty hard before the Wall Street crash. People aren't spending, they're saving. It's the liquidity trap. So if you get money, you pay down debt. When you don't have any debt, you put it in the bank. Whatever you do, you don't spend it. You hoard cash. Or people were buying gold. They were accused of hoarding gold, et cetera. But what they weren't doing was spending. And there was a lack of aggregate demand, and the banks were not lending. So Keynes said, well, if everyday people won't do it, the government must. The government can borrow. The government can spend. And what they discovered was that if you borrow $1 and spend $1, you can get $1.50 of GDP. Now, there's a separate debate as to whether that's actually incremental or whether you're just pulling growth forward. But so what? Even if you are pulling growth forward, maybe that's what you need to do when you're in a liquidity trap. But there's a problem. He called it the general theory of employment, interest, and money. But it was actually a special theory. I think he had a little Einstein on me because of the general theory of relativity, but it's actually a special theory, which means it's a theory that works in a set of circumstances, a set of conditions. The conditions where it works are you're either in a recession or just coming out of one. You have excess capacity and labor and industrial capacity, and you have very little debt. In those circumstances, you can borrow $1, spend $1, and get more than $1 GDP. The problem is that extra GDP you get for the borrow and spend, it goes down as the debt to GDP ratio goes up. What Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered is that at 90%, you go through the looking glass. Your payoff is now less than $1. You borrow $1, you spend $1, and you only get 90 cents of GDP or 95 cents, et cetera. So now, not only are you not getting your dollar's worth for the borrowed dollar or something more, which you did at lower levels, you're getting less than $1. So now what's happening? You're borrowing $1, you're spending $1, you're not getting $1 of GDP, but you are getting $1 of debt, which means your debt to GDP ratio is going up and the 90% is getting worse. And I just mentioned the United States is at 135%. So here are your two competing schools. There's the Keynesian multiplier and creating aggregate demand with government debt, and the Reinhardt-Rogoff, more than a thesis, I would say powerful evidence that beyond 90%, it doesn't work. It goes under less than 1 on the one hand. And my friend Stephanie Kelton and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and the modern monetary theorists who say, no, it's all good. How could you get growth if you didn't spend money through the government? These theories don't agree at all. We're going to find out which ones work. I'll give away the answer, which is that Reinhardt and Rogoff have it right. Keynes had it right up to a point. Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered that critical threshold, that whether you want to call it tipping point or phase transition, which physicists call it or whatever. The modern monetary theorists think the opposite, and we're going to find out. But what it means if
Reinhardt and Rogoff are right, and I'm right, and Keynes was right. The more you borrow, it's actually a headwind to growth. Now you get just as up to the threshold, you got more and more and more. Oh, sorry, at a low level, you got more, but then it went down. But it's like any diminishing marginal return. You know, the curve starts very steeply, you get a lot of payoff, then it flattens out, then it goes down, but it's still positive. But at some point, it goes below the zero line and your marginal return is negative. And that's where we are. So 90% is the critical threshold. The US is at 131%, highest in history, which means we are well past the point where you can borrow your way to growth or you can borrow your way out of a debt crisis. And we were heading for a debt crisis. So the way it works is raise interest rates, tighten money, reduce the balance sheet, et cetera, get unemployment up. It doesn't sound like a desirable goal, but that's what it takes. And that's what happened in 1982. Get unemployment high enough so people are buying hamburger instead of steak. They're buying, you know, whatever's the least expensive thing on the shelf, day old bread instead of new bread, or they're not buying gasoline because they're not going to work, et cetera. That will bring prices down, but at a very high cost, which we just talked about, which is high unemployment and lower productivity. Meanwhile, the U.S. debt keeps going up. We haven't really talked about the debt. That part of it looks like 1981. But if you throw in a global financial crisis, then it starts to look more like 2008. Yeah, well, that's like a glacier. Glaciers are extremely powerful, but they move extremely slowly. There's some exceptions, but they kind of like, you know, an inch a year, a couple inches a year, but they move mountains. I mean, they create rivers, they create canyons, they move mountains. They're extremely powerful, but slow. That's a good metaphor for the impact of debt. And when I talk about debt, in particular with the United States, but it applies to any country, I focus on the debt to GDP ratio, because you can't really talk about debt in isolation without thinking about the capacity to pay the debt. And a simple example, if you have a $50,000 balance on your credit card and you're making $30,000 a year and trying to pay rent in New York, et cetera, good luck. You're probably going to go bankrupt or at least default on that card. But if you owe $50,000 on your credit card, but you're making $5 million a year, it's, you know, you just write a check. It's no big deal. My point is, you can't look at a $50,000 debt and decide if it's a problem or not unless you compare it to the income. And if it's too low, it's a problem. And if the income is high, not a problem. So that's why you use the debt to GDP ratio. The US just hit $31 trillion in national debt. That is national debt, almost all of it in the form of US Treasury securities. Not all of it, there are other obligations, but mostly US Treasury securities. Well, is that a problem or not? Well, one way to answer the question is compare it to GDP, do the ratio. The answer is that ratio is now a little over 130%. What was it in 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected? The answer is 30%. 30% is completely comfortable. That's like the person with the $50,000 debt is making millions. No big deal. 30% is comfortable. 50%, yeah, getting up there. Angela Merkel and all her years in Germany, and there's a lot of research to back this up, says that 60% was the limit. And that's what the Maastricht Treaty that created the European Union and the European Central Bank, that was their goal. They said, don't go over 60%. If you do, you're expected to take measures, you know, raise taxes or you know, reduce debt or reduce spending, do something to get that back down under 60%. If you say, what's the critical threshold where, you know, water turns to steam, or, you know, water turns to ice, or something changes in such a way that it's not the same. It's radically different, but it happens very quickly. The best research says the answer is 90%. And this comes out of, you know, Ken Rogoff at Harvard, also Carmen Reinhardt, who's now the chief economist at the World Bank. But they've looked at hundreds of cases over hundreds of years. And I like that because it's not just, you know, kind of cherry picking data. Developed economies, developing economies, economies that issue debt in their own currencies, ones that issue debt in other currencies, principally US dollars, et cetera. So, you know, a wide variety of case studies. And they show that when your debt to GDP ratio goes over 90%, your multiplier of additional debt goes below 1.
So just to put that in context, at 30%, if I borrow a dollar and spend a dollar, I might get $1.30 of growth. Assuming you spend it wisely, that's a big condition. But you borrow a dollar and spend a dollar and get $1.30 of growth. Okay, the debt was productive if you put it to good use. But that $1.30 gets smaller and smaller. As you get closer to 90%, it goes to $1.20, $1.10, $1.05. Past 90%, roughly, you borrow a dollar and you spend a dollar and you only get 95 cents of growth. You don't get your dollar back in terms of GDP. And then 90% and 85%, et cetera. So 90% is the critical threshold. The US is at 131%, highest in history, which means we are well past the point where you can borrow your way to growth or you can borrow your way out of a debt crisis. And we were heading for a debt crisis. Now, Stephanie Kelton, she's the big brain of modern monetary theory. She's a professor at State University of New York. She says it doesn't matter. That they always point to Japan. Japan is at 280%, way past any member of the peer group. China's probably higher. China's a little more opaque because they are, but also they don't have as much national debt. If you look at the national debt to GDP, it's modest, but they have an enormous amount of provincial debt, and the banking system is owned by the government or controlled by the government. So when you throw in the bank debt, the state-owned enterprises, the provincial debt, and the government, so that's the real national debt. Stephanie Kelton says it doesn't matter because you're borrowing in your own currency. So if you're Argentine and you borrow in dollars and you print pesos, how are you going to pay the dollars back unless you have huge trade surpluses, which they don't? So they just default. Argentina is a serial defaulter, and everyone expects that. If you borrow in dollars and you print dollars, which the United States does, they're like, "What's the problem? Just print the dollars and pay the money back." Well, that's true. If you print dollars, there's no reason to default on dollar debt because you actually can print the money and buy the bonds. But it doesn't mean nothing else bad happens. What about inflation or hyperinflation? What about the foreign exchange rate? The exchange rate can collapse. And these modern monetary theorists show very little understanding of the international aspects. They treat the US like a closed economy, which it's not. I mean, if it were a closed economy and we didn't have to worry about trade deficits, trade surpluses, capital flows, exchange rates, foreign credit, China owning $1 trillion of US Treasury securities, which they do. If you didn't have to worry about any of that, I think they'd probably still be wrong, but they'd have a better case. But you do. And they're just not very knowledgeable about any of those things. But you can think of exchange rates as a conveyor belt. Exchange rates are one way the problems go from one country to another, or good things can go from one country to another, depending on whether your exchange rate is going up or down, the impact on terms of trade, et cetera. But they completely ignore all that. They also ignore the role of commercial banks. They just look at the Treasury and the Fed and look at money supply, but like kind of M0, but don't understand how commercial banks create M1 and they do their own thing. They're not on as short a leash as they seem to think. But if you read Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, she says, well, we don't really need a bond market, U.S. bond market. We only have a bond market as a favor to investors because it gives them a place to put their money. But why have, he said, you have government spending. So the Treasury borrows money by issuing bonds, and then the Fed monetizes the bonds by buying the bonds, and that gives the Treasury the money to pay the bills, et cetera. She says, do away with all that. Just give the Fed, wire instructions for Lockheed. And if you need 5 F-35 fighter jets, order them and just send the money right to Lockheed. Why do you need a bond market? I mean, she actually says that. So, okay, legally, that might be possible, but to suggest that you can do that without consequences is nonsense. And then you say, what about inflation? Their view is as long as there's excess capacity and unmet needs, et cetera, you're not going to have inflation because there's a lot of slack in the economy. That's a legitimate debate. But they say when inflation happens, raise taxes. And then, by the way, they also say you don't need a tax system because if you can just print the money, why do you have to collect taxes? And their answer is, we collect taxes to redistribute income.
Okay, well, at least they're honest. I mean, that's kind of a socialist model, but they're honest about it. But it's important to bear in mind that Stephanie was the principal economic advisor to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. And Bernie Sanders today is the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, controls the purse strings. So coming out of Congress, and Biden's kind of a cipher. He's barely aware of his own existence. So Sanders is in a powerful position, and she's the Bernie whisperer, so to speak, who's behind all this. So if you ask the typical member of Congress, can you define modern monetary theory? They'll look at you funny. They've either never heard of it or they certainly don't know what it means, MMT, But they're acting in accordance with modern monetary theory. Whether they know it or not doesn't matter. The actual behavior of the Congress, and again, just go back to COVID 2020, because we talked about the debt to GDP ratio. So in around May or June 2020, Trump put through a $2 trillion COVID relief package, and that was when the Paycheck Protection Plan, that was $800 billion, and everyone got the $1,200 check, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of December, at the very end of the Trump administration, they did another $1 trillion almost. And that's when everyone got the $600 checks. And now you're up to $1,800. By the way, those checks, that is helicopter money. That's, what the Fed does is kind of nonsense. But when it's fiscal policy, not monetary policy, and you're handing out checks, that is helicopter money. And credit to Larry Summers for saying, you're going to get inflation out of this. Well, Biden comes into office in January 2021, and he's like, not to be outdone, he did his own COVID relief package. That was another $2 trillion. And that's when we all got the $1,400 checks. They just handed them out. And then later that year, or they did the $1 trillion infrastructure package. And then just to top it off, what did we get recently was the just under $1 trillion Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Well, and the baseline budget deficit, before everything I just described, the baseline budget deficit was about $1 trillion a year. So take $1 trillion for 2020, 2021, and 2022, add on, $2 trillion for Trump's first package, $1 trillion for his second one, $2 trillion for Biden's first package, $1 trillion for the Green New Scam, and I think $1 trillion for infrastructure. That's $7 trillion on top of the $2 trillion baseline budget deficit. So that's $9 trillion piled on top of what was at the time about a $21 trillion national debt. So that's how we got to 30 trillion. That's how the ratio went from 106 to 131. These numbers are mind-boggling, and MMT says doesn't matter. But it does matter, and it shows up the way I described earlier, which is it slows growth. You don't get growth. So best case for the U.S. is very slow, weak growth, which we saw from 2009 to 2019. Worst case is you throw a recession on top of that, which we're heading for, and the U.S. will be in fiscal distress. But the Fed has a hidden asset.
What is the hidden asset? And how do you make millions from it? According to Jim Ricards, the Fed has a hidden asset called gold certificate. It's something that the Fed can and will use in times of emergency when we return to the gold standard. How and when the Fed will use it? Well, they'll use it to back the dollar when the dollar collapses and people no longer trust it. The Fed needs thousands of tons of gold, so they'll buy it from the public. So, what is exactly this gold certificate? Let's hear more from Jim Ricards.
If you go to the balance sheet, go to the asset side, the first line item, there's something called gold certificate. And what is that? Well, in 1934, the U.S. Treasury confiscated the Fed's gold. They had already taken the gold from U.S. citizens by that point, but they wanted it all. And so they took the Fed's gold, but under the but again, bearing in mind the Fed's privately owned. So under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it is illegal, it's unconstitutional to seize property without paying just compensation. You can do it, but you got to pay the person. And then people get into all kinds of arguments about what it's actually worth. So what just compensation did the Treasury give to the Fed when they took the Fed's gold in 1934? The answer is they gave them a gold certificate. It can be, you can calculate it. In other words, you can say, well, what is the amount of gold by weight?
not by dollar value, but by weight, that is needed to back up that certificate given the historic cost? Well, the answer is about 8,000 tons. Guess how much gold the Treasury has? About 8,000 tons. I mean, one of the reasons I've hypothesized that the Treasury stopped selling gold in 1980 because they lost gold to trading partners between 1950 and 1970. They lost 11,000 tons. They went from 20 to 9, but they sold another 1,000 tons in the 1970s to suppress the price of gold, which failed because it always does. But by 1980, they had were down to 8,000 tons and they stopped. Why did the U.S. stop selling gold? We've never sold any significant amount of gold since. The answer is, in my view, is that they can't go below that because that's the amount of gold the Treasury needs to back up this gold certificate on the Fed's books. So, okay, just kind of put that into one side. That asset is valued on the Fed's balance sheet at $42.22 an ounce. The price of gold, look today, it was about $1,850 an ounce. Now, so, what's, as I say, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If we're going to mark the mortgages to market, in a world where interest rates have gone up and the mortgages have gone down, it's only fair to mark the gold to market. And if you mark that gold to market at $1,850 an ounce versus $42, voila, you would find that the Fed has another approximately $350 billion of hidden assets. So I think that takes care of the solvency problem. So before we beat up the Fed on mark to market on mortgages, that's fine. But have a look at the gold and realize that they have a hidden asset, a shadow asset on their books that's worth in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
We've heard from Jim that the Fed has hundreds of billions of dollars of a hidden asset, and that hidden asset is a gold certificate held by the Fed and backed up by real gold in the U.S. Treasury. When the time comes, the Fed will definitely use it to back the new dollar. They'll even buy more gold from the public, and therefore the price will go up significantly. But how much exactly is the price of gold will go up? Is it a big deal?
I think it would be a very big deal. But it begs the question, if you're going to revalue it, to what level do you revalue it? So everyone said, well, the market's 1850. That's about where it is today. It goes up and down, but so revalue it at 1850. That could be highly deflationary. And the reason is, in effect, you're putting yourself on a gold standard. You don't have to. That's why they won't do it. They don't want to touch it. But if you did, you would be saying, hey, gold's really worth 1850 and we have this much gold, et cetera. But at that point, analysts would sort of turn and say, well, okay, well, you're back to a kind of gold standard. What's the relationship between gold and money or currency or US dollars and others, the money supply? But what is the relationship between gold and money supply? What you would find is that at 1850, the gold relative to the money supply is about 2%. Whereas historic gold standards were run with somewhere between 20 and 40%. Bank of England in the 19th century managed a successful gold standard between the Congress of Vienna and World War I with about 20% gold. In the US, through most of the 20th century, at least the first half, ran a gold standard with about 40% backing. It was actually the law. The law until the late 1960s, I think 1968, was that the Fed money supply, base money, could not be more than 2.5 times the value of gold. Originally at $20 an ounce, $20.67 an ounce, later $35 an ounce. But whatever that number was, times the amount of gold, that had to be 40% of the money supply, and the money supply could not be greater than that. And then they got rid of that in 1968 because of the war in Vietnam. But the point being, 20% has worked, 40% definitely works. The Austrians like to bang the table and insist on 100%, but maybe, but that's historically not been required. You just need enough gold to be able to give gold to people who want it when they want it. And if you're credible in that dimension, most people are content to hold the money. So as a hypothetical, you can say, well, okay, let's say we want a gold standard, and let's say that we want 40% backing of M1. M2 is a bigger number, or at least it can be. Let's just say, so 40% backing of M1, that's a conservative kind of gold standard, not extreme, but reasonable.
From February to March 2020, the Fed has printed $2 trillion. The impact of that is our money supply goes up, and so does our inflation. With massive price increases in food and energy, gold prices would have to rise too, right? And if the Fed uses 40% gold backing to back the new dollar, and with the current high inflation that we have, what would the price of gold be? Jim Ricards gives a staggering gold price prediction. Let's listen to Jim.
What would given the amount of gold the United States has, what would the price of gold have to be in order to maintain that ratio? The answer is about $15,000 an ounce. And people say, well, Jim, you used to say $10,000 an ounce. Well, that's true because it was true at the time. But when you expand the money supply, the number goes up, right? Because the amount of gold is fixed. So yeah, it was 10,000 not that many years ago, and today it's 15,000. Well, if you say gold's worth 1,800, people are going to say, well, give me the gold. I'll take all the gold you got at that price. And then they're going to have to shut the gold window again, and that has its own problems. But in other words, it's not clear how it would work. I mean, there are a lot of ways it could work mechanically. It's not clear what the government would actually do. But my point is, if you try to mark gold to market on the Fed's balance sheet, you're opening Pandora's box. Because you would be getting a lot of people, bankers, analysts, Wall Streeters, investors, to sit up and take notice and say, well, hey, what is going on here? You're back in the gold business. Well, you got the price wrong because you can't back up your money supply at that level. And the truth is you can't. The debt's not going up at 2% or 3%. The debt's going up 8, 9, 10%. Or more. The U.S. had a $1 trillion baseline budget deficit, $1 trillion per year deficit for fiscal 2020 pre-pandemic. The Congress threw $3 trillion of emergency aid on top of that. And I'm not even criticizing all those programs. I mean, the payroll protection plan loans, the extended unemployment benefits, the increased unemployment benefits. Imagine where we'd be if we hadn't done that. But that aside, debt is debt. They piled $3 trillion on top. Now, this is going to take the U.S. debt to GDP ratio up to 135%. It was 106% when Donald Trump was sworn in. It's close to 130% today. Because remember, you got two things going on. It's a debt to GDP. So debt's your numerator and GDP is your denominator, right? Well, what happened? Well, the denominator shrank. This got smaller. And this got bigger. So what happens to the ratio? It blows up. So now it's 135%. If you get the laws of economics right, which is not easy because most economists don't, but if you get them right, it's really a reflection of human nature. I mean, what is an economy other than all the people in the economy starting businesses, buying, selling, traveling, providing goods and services, et cetera. So human nature doesn't change, or at least it hasn't changed much in the last 100,000 years. So the fundamental laws of economics don't change either, but circumstances change, facts change, and that's important. Now, to answer your question, Kerry, you're right. There is a school of thought, a growing one, an influential one, that the debt doesn't matter. It's like, well, wait a second. So what? So the debt to GDP ratio went to 135%, which it did. Who cares? Well, what's wrong with it? 180%. We got issues. We got problems. Print up the money and monetize the debt and spend it and keep going. What is the problem? This comes under the banner of something called modern monetary theory, MMT. It's flawed. It's wrong, but it's got its followers, and those followers are now in the White House because one of the things Joe Biden had to do to get elected was to make peace with the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. They take the view that if the Treasury didn't spend the money, how would anybody make any money? That's ridiculous, but that's what they say. They say, hey, when the Treasury spends money, what do? Well, they build aircraft. They have benefit programs. They have government contracts. They do whatever they do. But when the Treasury gives you the money, you take the money and you spend it on somebody else, goods and services, go out to dinner, have subcontractors, whatever it might be. That's the real source of money. They also take the Treasury and the Fed and they merge them. Now, that's not legally the case. The Treasury and the Fed are separate institutions. The Treasury is just part of the executive branch, and the Fed is an independent agency.
and the Federal Reserve banks are actually privately owned. That a lot of people know. Some people know that, some people don't. But the Federal Reserve banks are privately owned by banks in the districts, so Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera. So they're completely separate. But the theorists ignore that and say no. The Treasury needs to spend money because that's how the economy grows, and the Fed can monetize the debt. So you spend the money you don't have, you borrow to cover it, you issue bonds to cover the borrowing, and if the market wants to buy the bonds, fine. But if not, the Fed can buy them and put them away on the balance sheet, wait 30 years and collect the money. What's the problem? Who cares about the debt to GDP ratio? It's kind of a statistical abstract, but why should that stand in the way of using money to solve our problems, which are free healthcare, free childcare, free tuition, forgiveness of student loans? That's a 1.6 trillion dollar ticket, by the way. And look, everyday readers and investors, there's no reason they should know all this stuff. This is total inside baseball. You have to be a geek like me to kind of keep up with it, but it's all coming. But what that means is we're going to test the Rogoff-Reinhardt thesis. Now, let me just take a minute to explain that. Up to a certain debt to GDP ratio, there is a Keynesian multiplier greater than 1. So the classic example is the UK was in a depression before the rest of the world. They have been hit pretty hard before the Wall Street crash. People aren't spending, they're saving. It's the liquidity trap. So if you get money, you pay down debt. When you don't have any debt, you put it in the bank. Whatever you do, you don't spend it. You hoard cash. Or people were buying gold. They were accused of hoarding gold, et cetera. But what they weren't doing was spending. And there was a lack of aggregate demand, and the banks were not lending. So Keynes said, well, if everyday people won't do it, the government must. The government can borrow. The government can spend. And what they discovered was that if you borrow $1 and spend $1, you can get $1.50 of GDP. Now, there's a separate debate as to whether that's actually incremental or whether you're just pulling growth forward. But so what? Even if you are pulling growth forward, maybe that's what you need to do when you're in a liquidity trap. But there's a problem. He called it the general theory of employment, interest, and money. But it was actually a special theory. I think he had a little Einstein on me because of the general theory of relativity, but it's actually a special theory, which means it's a theory that works in a set of circumstances, a set of conditions. The conditions where it works are you're either in a recession or just coming out of one. You have excess capacity in labor and industrial capacity, and you have very little debt. In those circumstances, you can borrow $1, spend $1, and get more than $1 GDP. The problem is that extra GDP you get for the borrowing and spending, it goes down as the debt to GDP ratio goes up. What Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered is that at 90%, you go through the looking glass. Your payoff is now less than $1. You borrow $1, you spend $1, and you only get 90 cents of GDP or 95 cents, et cetera. So now, not only are you not getting your dollar's worth for the borrowed dollar or something more, which you did at lower levels, you're getting less than $1. So now what's happening? You're borrowing $1, you're spending $1, you're not getting $1 of GDP, but you are getting $1 of debt, which means your debt to GDP ratio is going up and the 90% is getting worse. And I just mentioned the United States is at 135%. So here are your two competing schools. There's the Keynesian multiplier and creating aggregate demand with government debt, and the Reinhardt-Rogoff, more than a thesis, I would say powerful evidence that beyond 90%, it doesn't work. It goes under less than 1 on the one hand. And my friend Stephanie Kelton and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and the modern monetary theorists who say, no, it's all good. How could you get growth if you didn't spend money through the government? These theories don't agree at all. We're going to find out which ones work. I'll give away the answer, which is that Reinhardt and Rogoff have it right. Keynes had it right up to a point. Reinhardt and Rogoff discovered that critical threshold, that whether you want to call it tipping point or phase transition, or which physicists call it or whatever. The modern monetary theorists think the opposite, and we're going to find out. But what it means if Reinhardt and Rogoff are right, and I'm right, and Keynes was right, the more you borrow, it's actually a headwind to growth. Now you get just as up to the threshold, you got more and more and more. Oh, sorry, at a low level, you got more, but then it went down. But it's like any diminishing marginal return. You know, the curve starts very steeply, you get a lot of payoff, then it flattens out, then it goes down, but it's still positive. But at some point, it goes below the zero line and your marginal return is negative. And that's where we are.
Why are those residential real estate prices going up? And the same thing's happening in the United States. The answer is that there is an exodus, and I don't think that's too strong a word, out of the cities. People are put off by, I mean, cities have always been a trade-off. Cities are, okay, you have a lot of noise and some dirt and some hassles and maybe a slightly higher crime rate. But on the other hand, you have art and culture and museums and shows and restaurants and bars. And so you make the trade-off. You say, I'll accept these annoyances in exchange for all this, culture and buzz. And cities attract, the brightest people. So whether it's, bankers or lawyers or doctors or artists, playwrights, actors, whatever. It's just, there's a lot of buzz. That's why people go to cities. With these lockdowns, we've amplified all of the negatives and taken away all the positives. We've shut the museums, the restaurants, the bars, the plays, the office buildings, things that attracted people. But meanwhile, again, probably not as bad in Australia as it is here, but crime is on the rise. Murder rate in New York has doubled. Suicide rates across the country have tripled. And that's New York. The suicide rate's national. There are all these dysfunctions, and a lot of them, and of course, when you have highly concentrated populations, which you do in cities, a lot of that's worse. So what people are doing, I say people, it's the people who can afford it. They're getting out of the cities and they're going to nearby suburbs or even further out, what we call exurbs, which are, the next ring beyond the suburbs. And so there is that demand for housing. I'd be willing to bet money that the place you're describing is a pretty attractive neighborhood. So they're booming, and the same thing's true in the United States. But what's the other side of that? We're depopulating our cities. Cities are the greatest wealth generating phenomena in the history of civilization. I mean, that's what civilization means. It means cities. And so if we're depopulating and draining our wealth creating engine, what does that do to the economy long run? So as an individual choice, it makes sense and I understand it. But the macro effect is we're depopulating these wealth generating places. I mean, just take any downtown area. It could be Melbourne or Adelaide or Sydney or New York for that matter. If there's an attractive downtown office building, let's say you're a large company, insurance company, whatever, and you used to have 10 floors as your corporate headquarters. Well, now everyone's been working from home for almost a year. That's nothing that anyone would have recommended, a year ago. But we were forced to do it, and guess what? It works. Employers and employees are finding that, hey, it works. You can communicate and get stuff done, and maybe there's some attractions to it. So this work from home thing is here to stay. Companies will do, they'll say, well, instead of 10 floors, I only need 2 floors, and I'll have attractive offices, but you'll reserve them. You'll call up and say, hey, I need an office 2 days next week to meet some clients. Done. They'll build locker rooms. They won't be like high school locker rooms. They'll be very attractive. You'll keep your laptop and your sweater and your scarf or whatever in your locker. You'll show up, take your stuff out of your locker. Some receptionist will tell you which office is yours for those 2 days. Set yourself up, meet your clients, go home and work from home. What does that mean? If you cut commercial real estate capacity or utilization by 80%, we'll start with the cleaning crew and the reception, but what about the food trucks, the restaurants, the shopping, the public transportation, drinks after work, on and on and on, all the things that are ancillary to that downtown office location. You cut that by 50 to 80%. What is that doing to your economy? So these are examples. By the way, this will take a year to play out. This is not an overnight thing. So the tenants are not paying rent. If they are, they've called up and negotiated a 50% increase. I have some involvement in commercial real estate, and I see this in real time. So rents are down by perhaps half or all the way to zero if they're not paying. And everyone says, well, landlords are rich. No, they're not. The landlords take the rents, but they have mortgages. So if the tenants aren't paying the landlords can't pay the mortgagee, and that falls on the banks, right? Except the banks are clever. They've securitized it and sold it probably to you and me, right? We have our 401ks like a superannuation fund, but you look in the fund and do you have some, commercial real estate REIT or something that Morgan Stanley sold you? Well, maybe you do. And what's inside? No one knows, but take a look. But that ripple effect I just described can take a year to play out. So we haven't seen the end of this. So the bottom line on all this is that interest rates are going up in anticipation of inflation based on handouts. The reality is the handouts are not being spent, they're being saved, which does nothing for inflation. And it's also not sustainable, which is what are you going to do? Hand out a $2 trillion deficit spending package every 6 months? Because that's kind of what we've been doing since last summer. And they keep saying, well, this is the last one, it'll be sustainable. It's not sustainable. It's a handout and people need the money. But if they put it in the bank, which they're doing, this is a classic liquidity trap. So what's going to happen?
Yeah.
But meanwhile, the interest rates are going up, perhaps for the wrong reason, but they're going up. That's going to slow the economy further. We're already seeing mortgage applications dry up. We're seeing the housing bubble, not bubble, but pretty steep increase in residential housing starting to level up. So by, hard to say, but I would say by March or April, this whole thing is going to go in reverse. Everything we just talked about is going to go in reverse. The economy is not going to have the traction. Unemployment is going to remain high. Velocity is going to continue to drop. There's not going to be any inflation. Those interest rates are a headwind. They're going to drop and the price of gold is going to shoot up. So my advice to the potential gold investors is it's on sale. Go get some right now. It's always better to buy low and sell high. And but I would expect the price to be much higher by mid-year.
I know that you've said this before, or I'm pretty sure you've said this before, that to stimulate an economy, you need to reduce interest rates by somewhere around 3-4% to have an effect. When interest rates are currently at zero, how can you do that? Where do you go from zero?
Well, a couple of things. The short answer is you can't. You, in theory, you can go to negative rates, but negative rates don't work. We have experience from the ECB, Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, and elsewhere that negative rates don't work. They're negative rates, but they don't. It's not more the same. Cutting rates from 3% to zero has a beneficial effect, but cutting them from 0 to -1. Now you're through the looking glass. You don't get any more pop. You don't get any more bang for the buck. And there are reasons for that, which are as a central bank, what signal are you sending? Well, see, the idea of negative rates is you're going to spend the money. Because if I'm going to take it away, you put money in the bank, even at zero, you put money in the bank, you go away for a year, come back, the same amount of money should be there. That's the zero interest rate. But a negative interest rate, -1%, you put $100,000 in the bank, you go away for a year, you come back, you only have $99,000. Because I took $1,000, that's 1% negative interest. So the idea is if I'm going to take your money, you're going to spend it fast because you don't want me to take your money. And that's going to have the stimulative effect that we talked about. That's not actually what happens. What happens, two things. Number one, people have lifetime goals. Their retirement, their healthcare, their parents' healthcare, their children's education, buying a house. There's some large lifetime goal you have, and that's why you save money in the first place. If I'm taking your money away, you're going to save more, not less. You still want to achieve that goal. I've made it more difficult, but you're actually going to save more. They want you to spend it, but now you're saving more. And the second thing is, what signal is a central bank sending when they have negative interest rates? They're saying that they're worried about deflation, not inflation, but deflation. Yeah. So if they're telling me, if central bank is telling me that deflation is a problem, I'm going to wait. And why should I buy anything right now? Wait till the price drops. And by the way, a negative interest rate, -1%, my example, is a nominal phenomena. But in real terms, if you have deflation, my money is worth more. So even though my dollar amount may be less, my purchasing power went up because prices went down. And so that's why negative interest rates don't work, because A, you're sending a deflation signal, so people defer spending, and B, they have lifetime goals, so they actually save more. So negative rates don't work. So you're right, you're stuck at zero, there you are. Pardon me, you can do QE, you can do quantitative easing. And usually what happens is they hand the ball over, it's a rugby match or whatever, but they hand the ball from monetary policy, which is now impotent, to fiscal policy, which is deficit spending. But there you have other kinds of headwinds having to do with very high debt levels. More to the point, in terms of what a central bank can actually do, they can't stimulate. They can print money, and governments can spend money and incur deficit spending. But again, none of it does any good if people don't actually spend it, and that's a psychological phenomenon. And the Fed or the Reserve Bank of Australia or any central bank can print money, no doubt about it. but they can't change people's psychology. We had an external shock, an exogenous shock in the form of the pandemic that caused people to stop spending, save more, or they were unemployed. Or if you're the unemployed individual, you're not taking your friends out for dinner these days. You're putting money in the bank. And even if you still have your job, you're going to save money because you're worried you might be next. You might be the next one to get laid off, or your company might shut down next week or next month. And so you're going to save more. It's what economists call precautionary savings, or, in plain English, saving for a rainy day. And that's what's going on. It's going on all over the world.
Modern monetary theory, MMT, first of all, it's well over 100 years old, maybe 140 years old.
Okay.
So there's nothing particularly modern about it. It goes by another name, chartalism, but it's the same thing. Money is what the state says it is. If the state says it's money, it's money. I think, okay, interesting. How do you actually enforce that? How do you back that up? And the way you back it up is taxation. So if we all make money, gains, payments, income, whatever, and the state says you got to pay tax on it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we will only accept our definition of money in the form of taxes. So if you don't go along with our definition of money, you can't pay your taxes. And if you can't pay your taxes, you end up in jail. But the idea is that money is what the state says it is, because the state says that's the only thing we take in the form of taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, we'll put you in jail. Now, and that's where chartalism comes from, because the King's Charter or the Queen's Charter or whatever. So if that's your starting place, then there's no comparison between a national budget and an individual budget. If you and I don't pay our bills, someone's going to repossess the car, or take the keys to the house or whatever. So we got to balance our budgets over some time frame. But if the government doesn't pay its bills, so what? Just print some more money, and or raise money in the form of bonds. And then you say, well, what if they don't want to buy the bonds? If the market doesn't want to buy the bonds, and the interest rates are up. Well, that's what central banks are for. The central bank will buy the bonds, keep the rates low. Oh, yeah, but who's going to pay the central bank? Well, we'll just issue more. Now, I realize some of this sounds laughable, but I'm telling you verbatim, this is what modern monetary theory is. So there's no limit on how much you can spend, no limit on the size of your deficit. Danielle referred to the debt to GDP ratio. I agree, that's a very important economic indicator, but the modern monetary theorists will say, no, it's not. Who cares? U.S. debt to GDP ratio is about 130%, but it's growing quickly. And if you look at global statistics and say, well, who's at that lunch table? Like, who else is around 130%? The answer is Lebanon, Greece, Italy. These are your classmates. But then everyone points to Japan, where the ratio in Japan is about 280%. They say, see, Japan, you go to the Ginza, the lights are still on. Yeah. So we could go to 280% or whatever, no problem. I think Japan's a special case for a number of reasons, and I wouldn't want to be Japan. They're in a curious position where the population is declining. So their per capita numbers are actually better than their gross numbers. And Saki Kabar-san, famous Mr. Yan of the 1980s, he explained this to me personally. I had lunch with him in Korea. And of course he's right mathematically. I said, but the reductio ad absurdum is Japan ends up with one person who owns the whole country, and she's very rich. But that's kind of how the Japanese are thinking about it. Right. So I don't know if we want to go there. But just to take it a step further, and a lot of this comes from Stephanie Kelton, and I met Stephanie, very nice person, but she's just way off on off the reservation, so to speak, in terms of these theories. But she's done a good job of articulating them. So, for example, she says, and this is from her book, so this is not I'm not imposing this on her. She says that the government bond market is a favor to investors. We're doing you a favor by giving you something you can invest in. We don't actually need a government bond market because we could just give the Fed wire instructions to Lockheed. And if we want to buy a new, fighter aircraft or Raytheon or whoever is providing services to the government or the Social Security Administration for that matter, the Fed could just wire the money directly to these government vendors. Who needs a bond market? It's kind of an inefficient pain in the neck. But we do it anyway because you guys need a place to park your money. I mean, this is what they say. Wow. And so, but just to kind of step back a little bit, big picture, what they're doing, and this can be done in practice. See, the problem with refuting modern monetary theory is you get very far down the road saying, yeah, that's actually true, that's actually true, that's actually true. At the end, it all falls down. But they go very far down a path because the truth is you could give the Fed wire instructions and they could send money to Lockheed. You could issue twice as much debt. I mean, there's a debt ceiling, but Congress routinely raises it. But what she's done and what the other theorists have done, they've taken the Treasury, which is a cabinet level executive branch office, and the Fed, which is, an independent, privately owned, the president picks the governors, but, technically privately owned, independent agency, and she's merged them. She's merged the balance sheet of the Treasury and the Fed, said whatever the Treasury wants to spend, the Fed is there to finance it. The Fed can buy the bonds, or we can skip the bonds completely and just give the Fed wire instructions and send the money out. Now, this is what they say. This is not me. So, and then you say, well, okay, I don't see what's wrong with that. I mean, it sounds, legally, I'm a lawyer also, this is all true. It can be done in practice. I guess that's my point, regardless of the legalities. So, where does it all fall down? A couple things. Number one, the theorists completely ignore the role of commercial banks. They're so focused on the Fed and the Treasury. Real money, the money that counts, is created by commercial banks, not by the Fed. Pardon me, the Fed, when they create base money, that's available to banks as reserves, but there's no shortage of reserves right now. They're paying interest on excess reserves.
Right.
Most of the Fed's balance sheet is not cash, it's excess reserves. So there's no constraint on banks' ability to lend or borrowers' ability to borrow money and spend. That can be constrained by reserves in theory, but it's not, because they have trillions in excess reserves.
Okay.
So that's not even an issue. But but the money's created at the banks. If people don't want to borrow and banks don't want to lend, then the M2 and M1 and M2 don't expand. And then velocity, which is the turnover of money, is collapsing. It's up a little bit recently, but that's after a Red Bull cliff dive in 2020. And that's, I always say, if you have $24 trillion, and times zero is zero.
Right.
Meaning if that's your money supply and your velocity is zero, you don't have an economy. So velocity is psychological. The Fed can't control it. There are all kinds of behavioral aspects. The real money that kind of creates economic activity doesn't come from the Fed. It comes from the commercial banks. They ignore the commercial banks, and then on top of everything else, they ignore foreign exchange channels. You can destroy the dollar. Like, everything inside the United States can kind of look okay. But if the dollar is like, it's worth, €5 or sorry, $5 to the euro. So, it's worth 20% of what it is now. Every other currency strengthens against the dollar, or gold goes to $4,000 an ounce almost overnight. What you've done, you've devalued the dollar 80-90%, which is what we did in the 70s. Measured in gold, you go from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. That's a 90% devaluation of the dollar, measured in gold. And we actually had a 50% devaluation of the dollar between 77 and 81, measured by CPI. So this has happened before, not that long ago. So they're on a path to destroy the dollar. They're on a path to destroy the international monetary system. Here we are in Bretton Woods, where it all began. But governments may be back here trying to fix things sooner than later. So now, I doubt there are 5 members of Congress who could give you a tenth of what I just said about modern monetary theory. Right. But they're doing it. Whether they know it or not, whether they understand it, can define it or not, it doesn't matter. They're doing it. These multi-trillion-dollar, year-after-year deficits, debt to GDP going past 130%, unlimited bond issuance, monetization by the Fed or the commercial banks, they're playing it out. So this will end in something a lot worse than a recession.